A few months back I made a couple of videos in which I created new Thomas characters by combining two pre-existing ones. If you haven't watched those videos yet, I recommend checking them out after watching this video, links will be in description. But to keep everyone up to speed, I spun a wheel with the names of Thomas characters written on it, twice, and then drew a fusion of the two resulting characters. It's been a while since the last one of these, and so I thought I'd bring the wheel out once again. First on the agenda we have a combination of Ferdinand and Emily. When combining engines, I like to take the elements of each engine that are the most distinctive and make sure to include them. In this case, I think Ferdinand's most distinctive feature is his bogie wheels and the transmission under his boiler. In Emily's case, it's probably her large pair of driving wheels, and so I figured, what if I were to somehow create a mixture between Emily's big wheels and Ferdinand's transmission? So that was more or less the brief I set myself. Once again, I'm not necessarily drawing these characters in a specific style, although it's still realistic enough to give you an idea of how these strange character combinations would look if they appeared in either the books or the show. Those of you who have watched the previous videos on this topic will know that the characters I'm creating here are not serious additions to the world I'm establishing in my video series. But that doesn't mean I can't give them a job and backstory anyway. I've decided to call this engine Ferdily, and given that Emily is primarily a passenger engine whereas Ferdinand mainly pulls logging trains, perhaps Ferdily does a bit of both. Maybe they take trains to and from Henry's forest, both tourists who want to explore the area, and maybe deliver forestry equipment to the forest and collect logs from the forest to take to the sawmill. I can imagine Henry butting heads with Ferdily as a result, maybe resulting in a rivalry that sort of mirrors Gordon's rivalry with Spencer. Perhaps Ferdily is equally as interested in the forest as Henry, or perhaps they don't really care either way and just want to get the jobs done, which winds Henry up because he's not getting the forest related jobs and he actually does care. In hindsight, I probably should have included Henry in this drawing, but instead I drew Duck. My logic was that Emily is said to have replaced Duck as part of the main cast, since Duck was being considered as part of the Steam team for Season 8 onwards, but he didn't make the final cut since the production crew wanted a female engine instead. There's speculation about how the writing team would have used Duck if he was in the Steam team. Perhaps his Flanderization in the Brenner seasons would have started in Season 8 instead. The 2003 Bible also has a tidbit about how the big engines respect Duck because of his Great Western heritage, which doesn't really line up with how they treat him in the original stories. Perhaps Duck would have become the voice of reason who could put a stop to the big engine's antics, kind of like Edward, since it's not as if Edward himself was filling that role during the hit seasons. Going back to Ferdily, perhaps their role is doing Duck's work whilst he's busy elsewhere, i.e. literally a replacement for Duck, albeit a temporary one. Duck is surprised that such a large engine is doing his work, and hopes they know what they're doing. Ferdily has Emily's signature fiery temper, and assures Duck that they're perfectly suitable for the job. Unfortunately, Ferdily also has Ferdinand's level of common sense, and doesn't actually know for certain if they are the right fit to work the Little Western. Ultimately, it turns out that Ferdily is too big for the line, and derails on a tight turn that they didn't slow down for. Duck has to return to his branch line to help out, while Ferdily goes and does the job that Duck was meant to do, possibly involving the forest in one way or another. With that said and done, here is the completed image. The next engine will be a fusion between Mavis and Kevin. Like before, the goal is to take the most distinctive features of each character. In Kevin's case, it's obviously his crane arm. With Mavis, it's her cowcatchers and side plates. I wasn't sure at first whether to make this combined engine a road vehicle like Kevin or a rail vehicle like Mavis. In the end, I went with rail since the tram skirts would make more sense if this character ran on rails. Kevis, as I've decided to call them, is covered in hazard warning stripes. Both Mavis and Kevin have stripes like this on their front, and given that Mavis is black whilst Kevin is yellow, it made sense for the combined engine to be a mixture of both. And this looks a little more aesthetically pleasing than making the combined engine a Dijon mustard colour, at least I think so. The more I thought about a Kevin and Mavis hybrid, the more it made me think of the crane engines like Harvey, which mainly work in industrial areas, and so I decided to depict an industrial dockyard. Diesel crane engines seem to have not caught on in the UK, at least not small shunting engines, but the Netherlands had the 200 class, some of which were given crane attachments. I will admit that sometimes there just isn't much to talk about with certain art pieces, but I don't want there to be too much dead air, so anyone excited for Denge Attack? It looks pretty interesting, like Tony Hawk with trains. I'll definitely be keeping an eye on that game and hope it's good when it comes out next year. Kevis's personality, once again, is probably a mixture of those of the two engines that they're combined from. They're clumsy like Kevin, but also like to do things their own way even if it inconveniences others, like how Mavis is at the start of her character arc. I suppose that kinda makes Kevis a bit like Smudger, but unlike Smudger, who never learns sense, I like to think that Kevis eventually learned their lesson and became a better engine. Maybe Kevis's reckless actions caused something bad to happen to a fellow engine or dock worker, and Kevis decides to put things right before things can get any worse. And so, here is the finished drawing. Finally, we have a mixture of Bill and Ben and Samson. I suppose this is the most conventional of the three fusions in this video, since I'm combining one 040 industrial saddle tank engine with another. I decided to put each set of twins as a single entry on the wheel, lest I end up having to combine, say, Bill with Ben or Donald with Douglas. That would make for a very boring video, I'm sure you'll agree. Even crossing Bill and Ben with Samson seemed a bit boring at first, since like I said, their designs aren't that dissimilar. Nevertheless, I did what I did with the other character combos and picked out the most distinct elements of each engine's design. Samson's lack of cab and flat-topped saddle tank stood out, and Bill and Ben are very short height-wise. This got me thinking a bit more. The joke with Samson is that he thinks of himself as this big, strong, handsome locomotive, when in actuality he's this tiny industrial shunter. By combining him with Bill and Ben, I figured that I could make him even smaller, and maybe even more domineering and self-centered. I took cues from the Flying Buffer Beam, an engine built by Peckett which is thought to be the shortest standard gauge engine in the UK, and even uses parts that Peckett normally reserved for their narrow gauge engines. The engine I'm drawing here isn't identical to the Flying Buffer Beam, but it takes a lot of cues from it. He's so low down that half of his face is obscured by his buffer beam, kinda giving him a Wilfred from the Bash Street Kids vibe. Helping with this is his colour, which I thought was a good midpoint between Samson's dark green and Bill and Ben's yellow livery. I've decided to call this combined engine Benson, not to be confused with the character from Regular Show. Benson was sent to work at the China clay pits alongside Bill and Ben, but his huge ego and bad attitude did not win the hearts of the two yellow engines. Benson boasted about how strong he was, and so Bill and Ben decided to teach him a lesson by giving him all their trucks. If he was as strong as he said, then surely he could pull them all. This turned out to be Benson's undoing, since no engine could handle all the trucks that were coupled behind him. He was doing the work of 3 engines. He came to a halt, unable to go any further, and never boasted about his unparalleled strength again. And with that said, here is the finished illustration. And that's that. 3 new engines, each created by combining 2 pre-existing Thomas characters. It's been a nice change of pace revisiting this subject, and maybe further down the line I'll make some more. But with that said, I'll see you next week for something different. Be sure to subscribe and share your thoughts.